Dan, I'm not sure if we can record this.
And now we see Ambassador Pickering. If I owe you apologies, Ambassador, I don't know what happened. Yeah, I know you've been assiduously trying to get into this meeting. I honestly don't know the issue. You're so steadfast. You're such a good friend, and you've made it. You've entered our space here. We've been talking, Ambassador, very briefly about George Kennan, and you won't be surprised. There have been these two biographies, which I think are classics. I'll talk about this in the future with this group. One, the first. No, let me not spend time on George Kennan. Let me just say we've been talking about containment, Ambassador, and the ambiguities of that policy, and the fact that Kennan believed that he was badly misunderstood, and spent much of his life trying to explain that what he meant by containment was really not confrontation. It was avoidance of war. Ambassador, you have been U.S. ambassador to two countries in the Middle East. You have been ambassador to Russia. We are very absorbed and taken up by these dreadful conflicts that we see: Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, of course. There's one think tank that has counted the number of conflicts in the world today. It exceeds 100 if you count Sudan and South Sudan. To us, this is very shocking. To you, Ambassador, you've seen this. You can look back to your rich past, and you can see this in context. And I think that I know that you have dealt with horrible crises very skillfully. Tell us, what are we to think of these crises that seem unprecedented, and yet I know that you know the precedents that can give us some guidance on these matters. Can you give us some comments on that? We really look forward to that. I think you are muted. Let's see. On my screen, you are not muted. There you go. Try again. Sound test. I'm so sorry. My screen indicates that you are unmuted. Let's see. Ellie, any ideas? You've been so patient and faithful to us, Ambassador. Would you like to reschedule? Okay, we're going, I think, to another device. We're very eager to hear you on this topic. Yes, Maria. I know he has done that. He has.
Yeah, I see him as unmuted as well.
Yeah.
I meant more of the thing that when you connect for the first time, you have to manually allow the audio to be transmitted.
No, we've done that.
That's a good point, Maria.
Yeah. Ambassador, one or two more sound checks, and then let me give you the option of rescheduling. We're still unable to hear you. This is crazy. I know you do this all the time, Ambassador. We are on Zoom webinar. We have not had issues before. Let me try muting and unmuting you. Does that make any difference? Okay, now.
What if we took Maria's suggestion and Ambassador Pickering went out and then came back in and accepted the permission request to?
Let's do that, Ambassador. And I'm really sorry. I know that. How do I? Well, I've given you my phone number, Ambassador, 202-550-2820, and let's quickly chat and just tell us what your time disposition is. Our technician had suggested that you exit this meeting and try entering again. Meanwhile, I'll be glad to take your phone call. 202-550-2820. Are you able to make a call? Okay, I think he's left and is intending to come back. Let's see how that works. If it were someone else, we would go in a different direction, but Ambassador Pickering is, I would say, the senior American diplomat in the business today. It's worth having some patience. Have you noticed when things go technically wrong, they happen in series? Has everybody noticed that? I I was on America's most efficient railroad train yesterday. It was 5 hours delayed. It seems that things come in series. Things that are nobody's fault, they just happen. I don't understand. He's not calling me. He must have an internet issue in his own home, I think. Let's see. I'll send him one more note, then we may give up. Wi-Fi of cellular data.
He's asking, I think, if the call, if he's on his phone at least, if it'll give you the option of using Wi-Fi or cellular data, and you have to select that.
No, I know.
Yeah.
And he does this 5 times a day. I don't understand. Apologies to everybody. I can do this tomorrow at 10. I'm wondering if everybody on the call can do that. No phone call. Well, shall we see about getting through a few more of the Kennan slides? Let's do that while we're waiting. Kennan was very influenced by this novel, Thomas Mann Buddenbrooks, published in 1901. We think that he read it when he was a teenager or about 20 years old. If you're familiar with Thomas Mann, Buddenbrooks is the story about the decline of a wealthy family in Germany. It is one of these Bildungsroman things where it goes from one generation to the next, and it shows what was a great structure, which was a significant family in Germany, really coming apart. He was also very influenced by this book, written in the late 18th century by Edward Gibbon. I'm sure you've heard about the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And this phrase used by Gibbon, chastise the contumacy. Kennan was obsessed with this concept, and he read Gibbon constantly when he was going back and forth between his postings in Germany and Latvia and the Soviet Union. When he came back to Washington, they didn't use airplanes back then. They would go on ships, and he would have lots of time, and he absorbed Edward Gibbon. The reason I'm mentioning this is that Kennan was very much convinced that overextension, we've talked about this before in this class, overextension was what brought down the various empires. Ambassador, shall we? No, mine to you. I can very well. Shall we keep trying, or would you like to reschedule? Wonderful. We do. On strike against listening to you? Never. Can you, I think it's a matter of just clicking on, yeah. Containment, yeah. Yeah. No, Ambassador, I'm hearing you, but the group is not, okay? Because we can only connect you to the group through the Zoom webinar mechanism. Is it possible for you to find, we've sent 3 or, okay, thank you. Ken and Red, this is funny. I don't know if we're being recorded. Ken and read this book over a long period of time in the 1940s, and he was very convinced in the given concept that the cause of the decline of the Roman Empire was overextension. He applied this idea to the Soviet Union, and he predicted correctly that the Soviet Union would collapse because of being overextended. It was an empire. I don't think there's any, I don't think anybody contests that any longer. The Soviet Union denied being an empire, but of course it was. And Kennan in his long time.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we made it.
This is great. Ambassador, you're so good-natured and you're so loyal to this cause. We don't see you, but we hear you. And now we see you. Oh my gosh. Ellie, let's record this historic moment. Ambassador, our apologies. I don't know what came between us, but I know that nothing would ever really come between us. I think you heard what I said earlier. You've been ambassador to 2 countries in the Middle East, to Russia, Israel and Jordan, of course, Nigeria. We're traumatized by these things that are happening in Gaza and northeastern Nigeria and Sudan and Ukraine. Is there a way of looking at this in perspective? Only you could give us perspective on all this, because you've dealt with so many very huge crises in the past, and sometimes with great success. What can you tell us?
I can tell you 2 or 3 things. One, military action is a terrible way to attempt to resolve international problems. Almost every military action that we study begins with early hopes of immediate victory, goes on sometimes forever in endless war, occasionally, but very rarely, ends up in complete victory by one side or another, and depending upon the victorious side and its proclivities toward dictatorship, autocracy, and or representative democracy, we have an outcome that in at least 70% of the cases, I'm guessing, turns out to be a failure rather than a success. And that the end of the Second World War produced some of both, if we can call it that, and unfortunately set the stage for what we are now seeing, which is not yet a world conflict in terms of worldwide participation on a bilateral basis, that is squaring off on 2 sides, but a significant amount of chaos and turmoil that one can go back to the 16th century and the 30 Years' War, and perhaps even before that throughout the Middle Ages, to see, in fact, the turmoil being the order of the day, but that the successful efforts to resolve those disputes in ways that bring about an international regime which has built into it capacities to avoid future disputes has been a failure. Some of what we are seeing now has at least resolved itself around differences of view about how to structure the international community in ways that will prevent endless wars, ongoing disputes, the failure to mitigate, but in fact, indeed, to stimulate such activities as seeming answers to the problems of international differences, rather than to use diplomacy, the organization of the international community, the ability to bring together states of like-mindedness with respect to the notion that they would rather not participate in another conflict with all of its devastation and still seek to find answers to the problems. I'll just go on for a few more sentences. I think the kind of outcome that we would look for, and that I think George Kennan, whom I had the honor on a number of occasions of speaking with during the course of my career, would ratify this, that it needs, in effect, a situation in which a significant number of members of the international community are prepared to come together. Certainly, leadership, we need to be wary of the fact that we trust in leadership that is prepared to sell a solution which contains within it only the seeds of its own and planetary destruction and disruption. And we need to push toward something that we strove for in creating the United Nations, but now find somewhat out of date and somewhat inefficient and unable to bring about answers to the problems. A final point, I was ambassador to the United Nations during the first Gulf War of 1990-91, when Iraq had invaded Kuwait. And the system operated in many ways in the way in which the founders and drafters of the charter had envisaged. Seldom has it done so in large measure because similar differences across the board, particularly between the putative leaders, the large and powerful countries, have so distorted the landscape that being able to open the door to diplomacy is somehow now firmly locked shut. And that certainly is, I think, the best judgment I can give you about the stalemate in the UN Security Council, which has the authority under the charter to seek to enforce decisions, but in many ways is now bereft of the capacity of constructive decision-making in most of the areas where there is difference, and polarization seems to be an option of choice among great powers rather than a willingness to sit down at the table and be prepared to address hard compromises. And it's true with respect to Ukraine, and it's true, unfortunately, with respect to Gaza.
Ambassador, I'm sure you've heard the argument that when the UN was created after World War II, there was a country called the Soviet Union, and that the victorious countries got permanent representation, the P5, in the Security Council. There's now a different country, which we call the Russian Federation. I'm sure you've heard the argument that perhaps the Russian Federation should not simply take the place of what used to be the Soviet Union. Do you have an opinion on that?
I was at the UN when, in fact, that event took place. We were asked for our advice informally. We provided legal advice to the Russian Federation on the process of state succession. We had worked with the Russians over the period from February or from August 1990 through the beginning of 1991 and so on in ways that were constructive. We had reason to believe that that approach could be continued. There were, and certainly very clearly as we study the history, serious differences below the surface between the West and Russia that were not resolved, and which now President Putin has taken advantage of to try to put in place a military solution in place of substituting for a diplomatic solution to the destruction of large parts of the Ukraine and in aggressive moves to do so. And we're in deep struggle now, as I think everyone will tell you, about whether, in effect, this is another endless conflict, which it seems at least to be tilting toward these days, or whether it is a conflict that in some fashion or other can produce leverage in a diplomatic sense that will allow some coming to conclusion across the negotiating table. That is not something that we have all found simple and easy to do, nor is it true that on both sides of the differences between Russia and the United States, there is one side that has a fully, quote, correct position and another a totally incorrect position. The answers in a number of instances, I think less on our side than on the Russian side, but President Putin thinks differently, can be resolved around the negotiating table, and he doesn't seem to be ready to go there yet. President Zelensky has his own obligations to his own people and society, and one of those obligations is clearly not to be seen to be a capitulationist when demands from the Russian side for the cession of large amounts of territory at the time of its independence were part of Ukraine and were recognized as such by Russia at that time. I happened to be in Moscow right after those independence events. And full fruition of that. So you please go ahead and pick up on another discussion. I have an endless capacity as a diplomat to talk.
We want to benefit from this endless capacity, Ambassador. Listen, we made, with your help, this country made its best judgment in 1990-91 in finding a way for the Russian Federation to you called it succession to the Soviet Union. That was our best judgment. Looking back with hindsight, would you now say that you wish you had done otherwise?
No, I wish that we had pursued nuances and serious areas of difference in our policies toward Russia, in the full realization that what we were engaged on, particularly during the period I was in Moscow, was working and was having a more strategically and more carefully followed, could produce differences of view that became less and less reconcilable through the process of heads of state meetings and around the conference table. I left in November of 1996, and like the famous story about the man who jumped out of the Empire State Building, going past the 26th floor, everything was splendid.
So far so good. I want to get to Dmytro Gadomsky's question. Let me first ask, we know that Kennan was firmly opposed to NATO expansion. In the comments you've just given us, are we to think that you partly share that opinion? When you say we could have had a more nuanced position towards Russia, would that have included being less hasty in implementing NATO expansion?
In words of one syllable, yes. Further elaboration, I wrote a cable from Moscow in the middle of those discussions, a personal cable from me to the Secretary of State warning against the negative effects in Moscow of that kind of activity. And Bill Burns, the present director of CIA, was my political minister at the time, and he and his very able political section wrote a similar cable at a slightly different time, which Bill has published in his book. My cable has come out in a group at George Washington University, which has collected, declassified, and been able to publish those cables, and they follow much the same line, and it follows pretty much what you described. Now, I have to tell you that cable was not written with the notion that it was suddenly born in my mind whole and perfect, and that it was an absolutely necessary answer to a problem that was deeply conflicted. We had Russian aggression. It's come. We had, in fact, a situation in which those countries, because of their migrants' voting power in the United States, were not trivial to American electoral outcomes that obviously influenced views about how and in what way we should handle the freighted question of NATO enlargement. And so there was not a perfect answer. I tended to favor what Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, John Shalikashvili, had adopted and advocated, which was an earlier adaptation of the Partnership for Peace concept as a stepping stone on the road to NATO enlargement, which would have certainly included Russia, although Russia was invited on a number of occasions to participate in NATO enlargement and had its own suspicions and reservations about that. A very interesting story, which obviously does not have the simple 1, 2, 3, this is the answer. No other concepts or difficulties can be considered in the discussion. I think that your students should recognize this was one of those complex and, if I can say so again, freighted issues that we resolved in one direction, where I think more perhaps complex and sophisticated application of diplomatic principles might have helped in relieving what was clearly a growth of contention over this issue, at least in Mr. Putin's mind. And Mr. Putin's got an imagination as well as, I think, a creative mind. And so we have to be wary of the fact that everything Mr. Putin says represents eternal truth.
Yeah, and I guess we could say that diplomacy at its best finds the best approach possible at a given moment, which is never a permanent solution to anything. Maybe the Treaty of Westphalia had some permanence, but very few other diplomatic solutions have endured over the centuries. The ambassador has mentioned the book, it's not an autobiography, but the reflections of Bill Burns, current director of the CIA. I highly recommend his book called Back Channel to everyone in this group. It tells a story, among other things, of the negotiation of the Iran nuclear deal. It's a fascinating account of how diplomacy works at its best. And his own career is remarkable. Let's go to Dmytro Gadomski. You're on, Dmytro.
Thank you, Dan. Ambassador, I want to ask about the International Court of Justice. Last week, the General Assembly and the Security Council voted for the judges and the Russian judge wasn't upvoted. It is for the first time for the last like 78 or 79 years when the International Court of the United Nations will be working without the Russian judge. So I have two questions. Question number one is, what does that really mean in practice? And question number two, is this is this the wane of the Ukrainian diplomacy, or Ukraine has nothing to do with that, and that was done by the US and by the UK, etc., etc.? Thank you.
Dimitri, are you referring to the International Criminal Court? Which court in particular are you talking about?
I'm referring to the International Court of Justice, which is based
the ICJ.
in
Okay.
Hague.
Okay.
The ICJ. Yeah, that's right.
Ambassador, your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Dimitro, for a very, very interesting question. I have not followed in detail the ins and outs of the issue. It would seem to me that regardless of how one approaches it, it is not inconceivable, I can put it that way, that the US and perhaps Ukraine played a role in asking members of the General Assembly and the Security Council to withhold their vote for the Russian judge on the basis of their feelings about Russian military activities beginning on February 24th, 2022 and invading Ukraine. It does seem to me that the United States and Ukraine have worked very hard to build a coalition. It is not a complete coalition. There are people who are holding themselves aloof from joining that, but countries like China have, in fact, at least in part, warned Russia about their deep feelings against the use of nuclear weapons under any conditions in this issue. So it is not, in my view, easily separable from the current war that plays an influence in the lack of a Russian judge. Secondly, my sense is in the whole history of the ICJ, the judges are not supposed to represent national opinions, but inevitably do. And a concern then that if a Russian judge were elected, the opinion on a case for the Russian judge would be written in Moscow or with the full help and acquiescence of Moscow, and as a result reflect a partisan view rather than necessarily an independent legal view. How much of this is true in every case, we can leave open. How much of a judge's view in that sense represents the judge's own personal view, we can leave open. It was true in my understanding of the Soviet system that, in fact, judicial opinion was in large measure the product of the prosecutor's approach from the point of view of a government case in criminal cases in particular against a particular individual who was put on trial for an offense. If that tradition holds true today in Russia as a part of the system of judicial settlements, we are then lucky to have a court in which there are multiple judges with a wide degree of traditions that they represent, in the hope that with multiple judges, there will be an outcome that would be free and fair and follow rules and guidelines that were not necessarily only the product of a particular country's ideology or political outlook. That, I think, is important. We are following in our own country right now a serious dispute among people who believe that the Supreme Court justices should be chosen with primary relationship to the ideology they pursue in judging cases. And increasingly, this seems to be polarized along the lines of of the two major parties that contend for election in the country as a whole. Not my ideal view of how a Supreme Court should operate.
Yeah. You remind us, Ambassador, we had the honor of talking to Robert Gates, who, as you know, recently published 2 articles on the dysfunction within the domestic American system. You're describing, of course, the world system of justice. Gates believes and has said many times that he believes the greatest threat, security threat to the United States is the dysfunction of its own legislative branch. Do you have, you are an internationalist. This is, granted, this is a domestic issue. Surely you have an opinion about this. What would it be?
Well, I have a serious opinion about it, and I have long followed the legislative branch from the time before the Second World War, when I have brief memories, and noted that we, for many years, for decades, certainly during my lifetime, but long before that, took pride in the conclusion we reached that the American legislative process, particularly on a national basis, resolved itself around how and in what way elements of the two parties large enough to pass a single piece of legislation could come together around a legislative compromise that met the interests of the public and the people and the national interest, certainly as they saw it, and was acceptable in a situation in which the voting arrangement was not fully polarized. It was not just one party that had the right to dominate the legislative outcome on the basis of numbers of people that sat in the legislature that had adherence to that party.
Well, that gives us a pretty dark vision of the situation we're in. All situations are temporary, and I think it's Gates who says there's nothing inevitable in the future. I encourage others to come in. You see how accessible our friend Ambassador Pickering is. Have no fear. Have no fear. Come with your comments. Meanwhile, since you talked about the ICJ, let me say we've heard in the past from Beth Van Schaak, from Eli Rosenbaum, from Steve Rapp, the complexity, the incredible complexity of a process that would give an ad hoc tribunal for war crimes in Ukraine. Can you add your own reflections to that? It's so complicated. I think you need to be fully trained in international law, but I'm sure you have a view of what would be the path towards an ad hoc war crimes tribunal.
Well, I think that it is very much worthwhile considering since the Nuremberg precedents. The Nuremberg precedents has often been tended to say that to the victor belongs the justice, if I can put it that way. I think in Nuremberg, major efforts were made to look at the problem on the basis of what was the nature of the crimes, how heinous were they, what's the basis of proof that the individual was involved in committing those crimes, and what was an appropriate sentence on the basis of international practice and law over a period of time to play a role in punishing those individuals, at least with some eye to the notion that punishments can act as deterrents of future malign and malicious actions. So far, we have seen very little of that end result in a way in which events have unfolded, at least over the last couple of years, but perhaps before. And we need more attention to that. How to structure an international court to carry out these activities would, in my view, be to use the question of election to determine the choice. It is, in my view, the least worst fashion we can choose, which means that it does not have drawbacks. It has drawbacks of lobbying, it has drawbacks of polarization, It has drawbacks of coordination. It has drawbacks of diplomatic influence. It has drawbacks, perhaps, of an effort to try to build, in one way or another, a kind of judicial sphere of influence for one or another, perhaps state, since they have those capabilities, all of which are in one fashion or another drawbacks. One would like to see, perhaps at this stage, a step too far, the potential for competitive elections. One could look, in fact, at nominating a significant number of respected individuals for the positions that are open, perhaps twice as many as need to be chosen to fill those positions, and seeking the plurality of votes in favor of the judge on a scale within the body of judges, reflecting the fact that only those who receive the top votes would be chosen, and that a significant number would not be chosen, so that one could perhaps find a way to use merit, the question of experience, and the issues of how and in what way judges have performed over the course of their judicial history in international realm in particular, as a basis for going ahead, and hope that a significant number of judges will be seen to be worthy of that effort. Were we to do that, it is highly unlikely that even twice the number of judges for which there were allowable positions would not represent a judge for every country, far from it. And therefore, countries with no individual who owed national citizenship type loyalty to the country, if not beyond, was necessarily going to be within the competition, and that the number of judges would be sufficiently small that one would have the opportunity to select, and do so on the basis of merit. I have to tell you that jobs at the UN is a somewhat difficult proposition. I can remember numerous occasions when I was sent instructions to see the Secretary General, who during my entire time was Javier Perez de Cuellar. And I had in my instruction pending file both instructions to warn the Secretary General against favoring individuals on the basis of the political position of the state to of which he was a national, and to exercise full merit, while at the very same time I had a long list of worthy Americans who were contending for UN jobs that I had to go in and lobby for. I had the good sense not to do both tasks in the same meeting. But
Excellent.
Javier Perez de Cuellar
Yeah.
was a gentleman of
Yeah.
merit and ethics, and he understood exactly what I had to do. I didn't have to explain it to him, and I didn't have
Yeah.
to excuse myself.
Yeah. The ambassador is referring to the démarche system, which we've discussed before, and which is a whole fascinating phenomenon. Of course, the challenge, Ambassador, in your model is that Germany was an occupied country after World War II. Nobody's going to occupy the Russian Federation, so it will be more challenging, probably, to come to this type of structure that you described, which is a marvelous structure. I guess the question is how to get there. Let's go to Alina Shevchuk.
Thank you so much. Today's article in The Economist, if I'm not mistaken, raised the possibility of diminishing support for Israel. And from your perspective, do you believe that it's a real concern, or do you think that the public reaction to recent events is not as pronounced as the article suggests?
Thank you. Thank you, Alina.
Alina, it's a very, very good question. I was ambassador in Israel for 3.5 years. And 7 years before that, I was ambassador in Jordan for 4.5 years. I qualify as the initial member of what I have come to call the Schizophrenics Club. Those who served in both Israel and Jordan or Arab countries as ambassadors.
You've survived very well.
I acquired an admiration for both countries, and I acquired a liking for their people. And in many cases, Jordan and Israel were not the greatest of enemies. Over the years, quietly, often behind the scenes, they cooperated. My own feeling is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, whom I know well from my service in Israel, has made serious mistakes, particularly in allowing such rampant use of military force to affect so many Palestinian civilians. This in no way reduces my horror and my deep concern about Hamas's murder of over 1,000, we'll say, Israeli civilians on October 7th. Neither is justifiable, neither justifies the other reaction, in my view, and civilians have a right to be protected in any conflict, and it is the duty of every armed force under the laws of war to do that and to do so scrupulously. I say that with a great deal of trepidation and feelings of, put it this way, unease, because I'm not going to describe, I'm going to just remark Tokyo fire bombings, Dresden bombings, cities all over Europe on both sides of the ledger, Coventry, London. We only have to think about it. There was what I would have to call less than a scrupulous consideration for civilian population, and indeed in some cases, maybe Rotterdam, like Guernica in the Spanish Civil War, were the objects of attack purely to influence civilian opinion in one way or another against their own government. So these are complicated, difficult, and nasty questions. In my view, war can never be squeaky clean. A war without casualties is probably no war. I abhor war, and I think that diplomats should be spending their lives in diplomacy and doing everything they can to resolve problems short of the use of force. I understand it's unfortunately a natural proclivity of humankind to use force and try to exploit the use of force. So far, I found very few occasions when I would see and could conclude that the use of force brought about better conditions than what was the circumstance leading into the use of force, or that force had its own rhythms, its own capacities, its own abilities to create endpoints that were not in some ways almost ready-made conditions for the follow-on use of force, as we have seen, unfortunately, in Ukraine, Russia, and in Gaza, among other places where we have watched with great care the unfortunate outcome. And nor do I see significant work, which I have tried to approach in my own writing, to connect up how and in what way negotiated outcomes can be generated, even if use of force has to be involved. So how and in what way can
Yeah. We've lost your last set. Yeah. Go ahead. Yes, our
Like-
audio is not perfect, Ambassador. I
provide
yeah.
kind of what I would call mechanical force be made. Go ahead, thank you.
I think we can add that every example you've cited, Guernica, Rotterdam, Coventry, Tokyo, London, Dresden, in every case, the effect was the opposite of the intended effect, that the citizens became more strengthened and more resolved against those that had attacked them in that way. I think in every example that you've cited. Let's go to Kenya. We have several people using the same logon. I don't know the identity. Someone from Kenya has a comment. It could be Peterson Waweru or someone else. I've just unmuted you.
Thank you, Professor. I can hear you.
Yes, we hear you.
Well, thank you for the great speaker today. Quite well experienced, old man. I would love to pray to reach that age and still be knowledgeable. When I listen to our ambassador, he's more oriented on the Sun Tzu thinking that there should be greater avoidance of the use of military force and a resort to other alternatives, because success does not necessarily mean use of force. Looking at the incidences, and he has actually explained clearly on the issue of Netanyahu reaction, it's quite overboard. And I learned recently when Joe Biden said they are no longer supporting Israel initiatives if they don't come to an end. And I wondered what kind of an agreement was there in terms of the duration that the US had given Israel to be able to have accomplished their mission in striking out the Hamas. What kind of an argument could have been? Because when Biden was strongly opposed because of the actions of the Israel bombardment of the northern Gaza affecting civilians, there is a revert in the position, and the US now were against Israel actions. And saying they should end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a good observation. Ambassador, the questioner associates you with Sun Tzu, about who we understand as always wanting to avoid conflict. In that light, how do you see the Biden policy that he's recently stated towards Gaza?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. In my impeccable Swahili, asante sana. Kwa mafikirio yako kuhusu mtu wa Kenya. Thank you again for a very good question. It's a very important one, and how and in what way we deal with the issue of the differences between the encouragement of a full measure of self-defense, which is very much part of our mutual obligation, if I could put it this way, in one article of the United Nations Charter. It recognizes the full legitimacy of self-defense, and in doing so, I would think would recognize the idea that other countries aiding states in self-defense are perhaps on the right side of the international law and the history. And the difficulty when that particular set of activities takes place under a admonition to follow the laws of war, where the laws of war themselves sometimes are disputed, sometimes are less than fully clear, and sometimes result in a level of civilian loss of life much too high for any of us to be allowed to occur. And therefore, we need to tighten the rules further against that kind of activity. I have lost a picture of you, Dan. I hope you're still hearing me, but I'm going to pause at this point. I got your back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. This
Very
connection.
well.
No,
Another
sorry.
question from Nairobi.
No, I'm going to. We'll have to go in order. Ambassador, I see you. This connection is not great, and we've had some audio issues, but we have gotten the essence of what you were saying. In the interest of, I know the ambassador has time obligations. I want him to think about how much more time he has with us. We would keep you, Ambassador, till noon, but while you're thinking about your own schedule, let's turn to Stephanie Druzanok for the next comment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answers and thank you for your questions to my colleagues and to Professor Dan. It was very pleasurable to hear this. My question is a bit general. I'm interested in your experience and maybe you can share some memorable experiences as a from your diplomatic career that had changed your perspective to diplomacy or your approach to diplomacy.
I love that question. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'd be glad to stay with you until noon Eastern time, if that suits. And if that is too long, you can cut it short at whatever point you would like.
Time with you, Ambassador, is never too long. It can only be too short. Yeah.
And let me thank Stephanie for a very, very good and very difficult question for many. I think of a number of things that in the course of my diplomatic career helped me both to change my view, but also to reinforce my view of what was right, as opposed to how and in what way one could accommodate. So I was ambassador representing the United States in the United Nations from February of 1989 to May of 1992. And none of you, I think, were probably alive then, unless you're a great deal older than I suspect. But the historical event of importance was Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, which was met with a series of 12 resolutions before the conflict actually broke out from the Security Council, attempting to bring Iraq around to the side of international law and a withdrawal from Kuwait and a cessation of the damages it was causing. And it was a personal pleasure to be able to participate in that. It was not an easy situation, but we were able to find a common agreement, certainly between us, the British and the French, which would have been abnormal if we couldn't have, but also with Russia and China. Not on every occasion did we get 100% of all of the votes of the permanent members in favor of a particular action, but almost on every issue that had come up, those countries either voted in favor of the action to be taken or abstained, made in the course of the views, as well as the views of the other 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council, which in that occasion included countries as large as India and as small as Cuba. And it was a very interesting and important situation. And I think that while it was not a perfect outcome, my own sense was that those who seek to justify the American invasion of Iraq in 2003 on the basis that it had developed, at least the allegations take it that way, nuclear weapons, which had not happened, and that it was justified by a failure on the part of the coalition protecting and defending Kuwait, to have occupied all of Iraq are totally wrong. And that the invasion of Iraq was a serious mistake and something which has led to at least the continuation of further turmoil in the Middle East. A second issue that I think influenced my thinking as well was the request that I received in 1998 from the National Security Advisor of President Clinton's, Sandy Berger, with the full support of Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, that I lead a group of Americans to work very closely with the President of Colombia, his ambassador in the United States, and his cabinet to develop a program to support Colombia in its efforts both to contain, reduce, and eliminate drug trafficking, as well as to contain and preserve his own country against the civil war then ongoing between groups that wanted to act to use force against the government and the government, but perhaps more successful than other similar efforts. And I have to caution those who tell me that they thought it was an extremely able effort, even implying an impeccable one, that it did really fail in the last analysis to end the drug trade, which was something of great interest to the United States because it deeply affected the United States, but that the effort did preserve the independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Colombia, and has led to a series of Colombian elections which have been won by both sides of the Colombian political spectrum, something that is not necessarily totally the case in all of Latin America. And so they changed my views in part about what diplomacy could accomplish. They changed my views about the absolute necessity of international cooperation. They changed my views in part about the fact that the Security Council, which in the Cold War preceding that period had been condemned pretty much to permanent stasis without much action, could in effect be used as an instrument of bringing about peace, an end to conflict, certainly, and real change in how and in what way governments acted and governments conducted their own leadership of their own countries in ways that could be successful even in the face of civil war.
Thank you for that personal reflection. And you have contrasted, you have implied a contrast between the actions of James Baker in in Iraq War I and Colin Powell in Iraq War II. I won't ask you to judge these two individuals. I'll just point out, I remember James Baker, I believe Finland was on a temporary member of the Security Council at that time. And I remember Baker actively lobbying, pulling people into private rooms. I don't know what he told them, but he convinced them without intimidation, I think. He convinced them to sway their vote in favor of an intervention, whereas this was not the case, I believe, in the 2002 run-up to the March 2003 invasion. I'm not asking you to compare these two individuals, but I believe that very different things happened as a result of their work. You have said that.
I think there are good reasons for that, Dan. I think there are good reasons for that. I would only comment that Mr. Baker's presence was in itself a formidable, put it this way, influence in any conversation. But so was General Powell's.
Yes.
General Powell may well have had, he's no longer with us to defend himself, may well have had the notion that loyalty to presidents and presidents' views, in this case, George W. Bush, are a primary requirement for the kind of service he gave as a general officer and as Secretary of State, and one can only respect him for that. But one also believes that secretaries of state have a primary responsibility to provide their views to the president and do what they can to persuade the president of the correctness of those views. And that's something that the public has from time to time faulted General Powell on. I'm not sure that that is necessarily a well-drawn fault. General Powell gave a speech in the Security Council, I guess.
Yes, yes.
In February of 91, no, later after the war in April of 91, which I think he was unfortunately led to believe where certain facts were facts and were rather not. They were conclusions perhaps based on views that had certain ideological antecedents.
Yeah, I believe it was 2002. I do remember James Baker in the Madrid Middle East Peace Conference, and I'm smiling at your own character. I can assure you that everyone in that room was terrified of that man. A very benign person, but as you said, his presence, oh no, one does not disagree with James Baker in public. He was a remarkable sextate.
Yeah.
Let's move back, since you've been so generous to give us more time, to Kenya. We have, as I mentioned, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. But can you hear me, Dan?
Absolutely. Who is that?
Very well. Dan, thank you for giving me this opportunity. First of all, I would really like to thank the Ambassador Thomas Pickering for the efforts he made to come and talk to us and give us this wonderful presentation. Secondly, I would like to thank him and encourage him for that very good Swahili. He spoke very good Kiswahili. Well done.
Good. He passed the test. Thank you.
Now, my question is regarding the British colonies in Africa versus the French colonies in Africa. And during your introduction, you actually told us that Ambassador Thomas worked in Nigeria.
Yes.
And now my question is, when you see generally the former French colonies, the military coups are very common as opposed to the former British colonies. I would like the ambassador to talk to us about that. And also, I would like him to talk about Nigeria was actually a former British colony, but it has had quite a big share of military coups. Thank you very much. Those are the two areas I would like the ambassador to talk about.
Another excellent question. And it seems that the French may have given up almost in West Africa. President Macron is showing signs of so much frustration. I'm not sure the French will even remain in some of their former colonies. Ambassador, your view of that?
Certainly, I'd be very happy to address that question. And asante sana mtu wa Kenya kwa mafikirio y maneno yako kuhusu el matatizo ya coups.
Could you repeat that in Ukrainian?
French. No.
Okay.
Maybe in French.
Okay. No, but this is
Thank
a very
you very
important.
much for your very fine thoughts and ideas. Yeah. Thank you very much for your very fine thoughts and ideas from the gentleman from Kenya on a very important question, the French and the problem of growing coups. I believe that while maybe not all in the French government would agree with me, there is the beginning of what one would call a slackening off of what we saw about the use of French military force in Africa to deal with problems that one could only call coup d'etat, military disruptions of the orderly process of government. Some may well be, in the views of their admirers, highly justified because of the failure of the government of the day to take into account certain principles and activities. I'm not sure, however, we have yet reached the point where we have codified rules of conduct that basically say after a certain amount of unacceptable actions on the part of the government to the people of the country, there is an explicit and clear way to justify the military moving in with the use of force to dominate the scene, change the government, and shift what we would call the political process in a way favorable to their own outcomes and desires. I don't think we'll ever have a situation where that becomes the predominant way of proceeding, but we will have episodes from time to time that do so. I participated from time to time in the Council of the Organization of American States, where we took steps together, in fact, to rule out the recognition of those kinds of coup d'etat. And in fact, that is something that the Latin American states have worked very hard to uphold as a way of defining in the post-coup situation how and in what way they will, in one fashion or another, restrict their actions to cooperate with military who have conducted a coup and replaced the government of a country and sought to conduct international affairs with the rest of the Latin American hemisphere. The Organization of African States has looked at this as well. I'm not sure how far they have gone in that direction, but it does seem to me that a regional solution among regional organizations to the problem of the affliction of, we would call it a coup addiction, is a serious and important problem. It's contrary to the maintenance of democratic values and ethics. On the other hand, the failure to maintain democratic values and ethics has not become an immediate justification for the free launching of coup d'etat by military in their own country, and shouldn't be. We need to find better ways to deal with that issue. One can say frequent, free, open, and fair elections should be at least the beginning of the effort to try to deal with the discontinuity and indeed damage caused by coup d'etat, both to orderly government and to people's secure, protected lifestyle and ability to earn their own income and provide for their own families and their survival. So thank you for the question. The questioner was not wrong. Nigeria, of course, had its own problems with military participation in the government without their having been elected to that particular task. That on its own has caused problems and discord, and at least came alongside of civil war, one based on ethnic linguistic differences among Nigerian groups who played a significant role in the management of the country and in its economic, social, and political development. Nigeria, I hope, has overcome some of that. At least it is still afflicted with problems of discord, banditry, corruption, and so on.
We're getting no
is
audio. Okay.
present in most countries.
Yes, and the ambassador points out the value of having regional solutions in the current situation in West Africa. ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, which is basically Nigeria, had made an ultimatum, had said, you must turn, I believe it was Mali, maybe Guinea, where they said, we're giving you a timeline. If you do not turn over your military coup to a civilian government, we will take military action. But they failed to do so. Maybe the African Union has greater authority than ECOWAS, but that's, I guess, the future will tell us that. Let's go to Maria Znamenok, and I want to, after that, ask the ambassador to give us any concluding remarks that would constitute advice for the future of our brilliant colleagues and students, and in some cases faculty here, in terms of their own professional development to become practitioners in aspiring to do what you have done, Ambassador. Let me give you a moment to think about that, the advice that you would give us collectively, while we turn to Maria Znamenok for our last question. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. First of all, I'm glad to be a part of such a wonderful conversation. Actually, half of my question was the idea to ask for advice.
Yeah.
Basically the same idea.
Sorry.
It's okay, because I have the first half of my question as well, which is, in your tenure as ambassador of the United States to Russia, did you notice your views or perception of Russia change as you lived in the country, as you experienced the people, the government, etc.?
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dan. I got a telephone call, interrupted Maria, unfortunately, as she mentioned the critical ask. Could you repeat that for me?
Yes.
Because I know she asked for advice, as you did, but
that's right. Her other question was, in your work in Moscow, how did your views change towards Russia, its politics, its culture? You were there long enough to have deep impressions. Did they change over the course of time, your own view of that country?
Yes, let me answer that first and then go to the advice. I came to Russia as the first fully post-Soviet ambassador to American ambassador to Moscow. I had no idea what to expect in terms of how and in what way people would react to you or to the post-Soviet period. I found, interestingly enough, the Russian bureaucracy very slow to change, but the Russian public change, and the discipline in the governmental system on the one hand, and on the public side, the feeling that over a period of time, the things that they had been prohibited from doing were now available for them to do. And they wanted to take full advantage of that situation. And that included things like the ability to speak out in any way they wished to do so about how and in what way politics, economic organization, or other arrangements should be changed. I found that there was much truth in a statement quoted to me by several Russians at the beginning of my tour. They quoted Adam Michnik, a Polish economist, who famously said that turning capitalism into communism is like making a fish bowl into fish soup, but we don't know how to do the opposite. And it was eternally true. One of the great questions that constantly occurred in my 3.5+ years in Moscow was, what are the best policy support arrangements we can devise to help Russians come to a situation in which the kind of openness, freedoms, and processes that characterize the more successful Western states get a fair chance of being introduced and work. And who's to make the choice, or how can that choice be made so that it does not breed civil conflict so much as civil harmony and accord in coming through with the answers? There were enough differences that was a serious problem. And there were obviously enough elements of nostalgia about the previous regime, particularly as it disappeared and was no longer seen by many members of the Russian population as either a threat or a drag on their capacity to do as they wished, as, interestingly enough, something that they might seek at least a partial return to. And so it was a very interesting phenomenon that people, in some ways, were concerned about change, concerned about the nature of change, concerned about the uncertainty of change, concerned about the unpredictability as a result of change, and how and in what way they would be affected by it, and how and in what way they might be forced to accommodate to it. Let me just say that in advice, my view is that as you proceed in life, both in events like marriage, education, engaging yourself in employment, the ability to understand what you're about, to be fully knowledgeable about your options, alternatives, and possibilities, to keep an open mind about how other people think, to try to draw the best of advice that you can find in terms of how and in what way you might proceed and advocate different solutions to differences and forward paths for groups you might belong to, whether they're in business or family or social arrangements or religion or otherwise, are all, I think, very, very important for success. And so being on top of developments is very valuable. We're entering a stage in which people have a tendency to want to break through on a situation in which Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a famous American senator, said, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but no one is entitled to his own personal set of facts. And we are seemingly moving into a period where rampant of recitation of factual circumstances that have little to do with truth and less to do with reality create a serious danger for us. And we have an obligation for our own interests, not those necessarily of other people, but also they are shared, to produce the best outcomes by being as close as we possibly can to an understanding of the truth, whether we like it or not, and come to grips with the necessity that we have to accommodate in our efforts to deal with those problems with the truth, and that we have to pick and choose those people that we would support, and those people who we will back, and those people to whom we will provide advice, on the basis of our best understanding of the truth, and it has to be a constant struggle. At no time are we, put it this way, the victims of total truth in our grasp without contemplating the notion that things are constantly changing around us and that we should be available, have that available. And that much of our life these days, and particularly in science and technology, is based on the scientific method. And if the scientific method were distorted by constant changing and reinterpretation of the truth without benefit of data, facts, and figures, we would be in an even sorrier mess than we are.
Ambassador, I guess the coffee mug slogan that we would want to have on our coffee mugs would be understand the truth even when we do not like it. That's a profound truth in itself.
Well,
I don't
Dan,
know.
I would say, Dan, I could perhaps add a little bit to your very, very useful summation. Understand the truth, especially when it's difficult.
Fantastic. And I'm sure everyone is intending to read Thomas Kuhn on this topic and his study of paradigms in the scientific revolution. Required reading. Ambassador, I don't know how to express our gratitude. You have vast experience and vast wisdom. You have shared it with us today. We're very, very honored, and we're very indebted to you. And we wish you well in the things that I know you must be doing at this time.
Thank you, Dan, and for the honor and privilege of speaking with you and your students. And I consider this one of the most important things for people who are now engaged in retirement or semi-retirement to try to continue to do. And I'm particularly pleased we were able to make the connection and keep it going for a while.
Thank you again. We will not allow you to retire in any form. We'll be nagging you for advice at every turn. Thank you, Ambassador. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. All good luck and best wishes. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. See you Thursday, everybody.